And this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, a Bloomberg exclusive. A new handset officially joins the race for smartphone domination, just as Apple and Samsung prepare to reveal their newest handsets. Essential's president offers his take on why their new device is a must-have product. Plus, the battle raging between the board and founders of one of India's biggest software services providers. We'll discuss the criticism inside the C-suite that pushed out the CEO and the road ahead for the Asian tech powerhouse. And the big screen could soon be taking center stage inside America's living rooms. We'll explore a potential new Hollywood partnership that could change the movie landscape and the rush for new blockbuster releases. But first, to our lead. Steve Bannon is officially out at the White House. Bannon was the controversial architect of President Trump's election victory and the leading champion of conservative populism within the administration. As the former chair of Breitbart News, Bannon served as a link to the so-called alt-right movement and catered to the most conservative elements of the president's base. Sebastian Gorka, a Bannon ally who previously worked with him at Breitbart, is also said to face possible removal from his post as a counterterrorism aide to the president. We've also just learned that Carl Icahn says he will no longer act as a special advisor to the president. Icahn tweeting out, "Today, with President Trump's blessing, I cease to act as special advisor to the president on issues relating to regulatory reform." The exit of Bannon and Icahn and possibly Gorka caps a tumultuous 4 weeks in which many senior officials have announced their departures, including the former White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, former Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci, and Press Secretary Sean Spicer. Joining us now to discuss where all of this leaves us and the Trump administration, Bloomberg's Washington executive editor Craig Gordon, and joining us on the phone, Matt Belardi, former White House Chief of Staff for President Clinton. Craig, I want to start with you, though. We're just getting this new news now about Carl Icahn. His statement doesn't mention anything about the events of the last few days. He talks very specifically about regulatory reform. But what's your take?
Yeah, and if you read the letter that he sent to President Trump, which he's posted on his website, very helpfully for us, there recently was a new regulatory affairs chairwoman named in that agency, Naomi Rao, and she, her job is essentially kind of watchdogging all the different regulations that come and go inside the government. Now, we know Donald Trump has been very aggressively trying to knock down those regulations and reduce the number, cut back on some of the ones Obama put through right at the end of his term. So, that's been a very high priority of his. And what Carl Icahn says is if you have a person officially doing that, I don't really want to be in a position of unofficially doing it and giving Democrats, a reason to to take a shot, because one person should really lead the charge there. So I don't think it doesn't seem from his letter, at least, to be related to the events of this week and some of the controversy over Trump's statements on race.
Now, Mac, you've been inside a White House inner circle, certainly not a White House like this one. But when you look at the ousting of Steve Bannon, do you think we can draw a line between the events over the weekend and the reaction to the president's comments about those events and him leaving the administration?
I think that's hard to know. I wouldn't immediately rush to that conclusion. This has been a tumultuous White House, as you appropriately noted. What I think they so much want to do and need to do, and I think General Kelly certainly is focused on this, is achieving some measure of stability and focus on the president's agenda outward, not inward with this continuing telenovela. I would say, as Craig had noted earlier, Steve Bannon's decision to resign, or perhaps he was asked to resign, however it plays out, and we'll see that in the coming days. This is, I think, a major development, because clearly Bannon was the link to the conservative alt-right, if you want to call it that, but certainly much of the conservative support that President Trump enjoyed in the campaign.
So we've been looking at this photograph from January from inside the Oval Office, where you see the president and the vice president and several people who are no longer there: Reince Priebus, Steve Bannon, Sean Spicer, and Michael Flynn, all of them now gone. Do you think the revolving door, dysfunctional nature of this administration will stop at this point, or can we only expect it to continue?
It needs to. That one of the questions you're hearing, of course, will there be other people serving in the administration? Will they feel uncomfortable continuing to serve? particularly after the Charlottesville situation and episode. We haven't seen any suggestion that might be the case, but I would say part of the real issue here is you've got to change, pivot from campaigning to governing. And to govern, you've got to have a team in place. We had all of our cabinet confirmed the day after the inaugural. President Trump and his team are still really struggling getting a government in place aside from this revolving door at very high levels. The president has to be steady on the world stage. The National Security Council is key there, as well as his cabinet members. I do think General McMaster was an excellent pick in that regard. But where you really start to get traction in a new administration is passing legislation, getting the people's business done. And to date, this administration has not been successful in doing that. They've got to get some stability, stop this inward focus, which is the revolving door that you point to at very high-level positions.
Now, Craig, an editor at Breitbart, tweeted #war. Breitbart, of course, has been unfailingly supportive of the president, but now there are reports that Breitbart may try to attack people in the inner circle, though not yet the president himself. Reports that Bannon may return to Breitbart. You know, how concerned does the Trump administration need to be about now opposition from the conservative media?
I think they should be very concerned, quite honestly. I mean, that was always one of the arguments for why Steve Bannon could or might keep his job, is that it's better to have him sort of inside the tent than outside the tent throwing stones. Breitbart has made it clear to associates, as my colleague Josh Green, who wrote the terrific book on Steve Bannon, is hearing, that he's perhaps ready to go to war here. I don't know that he would do that directly at Donald Trump, who, they had actually a very close relationship. It's obviously frayed in recent weeks and months, but I think there's people we know he's been battling with inside the administration. The chief economic policymakers, Gary Cohn, Steve Mnuchin, some of the folks Mr. McClarty just mentioned, H.R. McMaster. I would be surprised if Mr. Bannon could hold his tongue on some of those folks about whom he has very, very strong feelings in the negative.
Mac, our White House correspondent Kevin Cirilli tweeted a source close to Bannon told him Democrats have seized control of the White House. Kelly, Gary Cohn, Jared Kushner, Ivanka are all Democrats. I mean, when it comes to governing, do you think that there will be any change or any shift in policy or in the rhetoric that we hear from the president himself?
I think you have already seen in policy, as the president has put forth some of his major initiatives, although, again, he has not achieved much momentum or traction on them, more traditional Republican views put forward on lower taxes, less regulation. Infrastructure is a natural for bipartisan support. I think you have already seen a somewhat more muscular foreign policy with Secretary Tillerson, Secretary Mattis, and General McMaster. So I would really put forth the notion that what you're hearing and suggesting is this is not as radical of agenda as some of perhaps President Trump's conservative supporters wanted it to be. But I think it's a far step to say it's a Democratic agenda.
All right. Mac McClarty, former White House Chief of Staff, there with us on the phone. Thanks so much for calling in. Bloomberg's Craig Gordon with us in Washington. Craig, thank you as well. Coming up, our exclusive conversation with Essential COO Niccolo de Masi as the company's first ever phone officially hits the market. This is Bloomberg. A new chapter in the battle for smartphone domination begins today. Essential is officially celebrating the release of its phone, now available to order. And the phone is set to go squarely against the biggest players in the game, Apple and Samsung. Joining us now for an exclusive conversation about the launch, Niccolo de Masi, President and Chief Operating Officer of Essential, with the phones in hand. Absolutely. So, there's a lot of competition out there. Why is this phone essential?
Probably 4 areas I'd highlight. We have a unique style, titanium ceramic. It's a form factor that you love it or hate it, but a lot of people love it. Most people love it. It's also got no bloatware on it. There's no logo on it. It's your phone. We're big in believing this is a pro-consumer brand. We don't want you to have to advertise for somebody else. It's really your personal property. You choose what goes on there. We have a unique accessory port, and this is something that allows you to upgrade the phone, extend the phone, add new capabilities. And best of all, we have the world's smallest 4K 360 video camera, which I'm actually going to show you right now. We can record this segment in 360 video as well, not just on Bloomberg cameras. So if you look over my shoulder, you can see this is the first UGC for VR. So this is effectively an experience where you can put a goggle on or a helmet on.
There we see.
You can see what it's like to sit where I am right now. But you don't have to have goggles. This is the cool thing about 360 video, right? You can look at it on a phone, a tablet, a laptop. You can also take 360 photos.
Okay.
So we're going to revolutionize the selfie as well, Emily.
Can I see a selfie of me in 360?
Yes, we just took one. Here, you can take one as well if you want.
All right. So you guys have some courage. It's the week before Samsung's new phone comes out, a month before Apple's new phone comes out. Are you concerned about the competition? Are you scared?
We're proud of the fact that we're beating everyone to market, to be honest, with the world's biggest screen and a small
Well, they're already
factor,
on the market,
right?
okay?
Not with this innovation, right? So our model is to bring innovation to market faster than our competitors can. We have a number of things we've changed, which we are absolutely beating people to market. No one else has a 360 4K camera, so we know we've got a year or 2 year lead on this. Nobody else has got the magnetic accessory port. So this is a device you can really invest in, an ecosystem you can invest in for the long term. And there'll be an accessory coming about every quarter or so. We're shipping already off our website, and one of the things I'm most excited about is the fact that a third of our users are actually coming off of iOS phones that are ordering. A third are coming off of Samsung phones that are ordering. So only a third so far are coming from users who aren't on one of the duopoly phones.
All right. So, you know, there have been some complaints in the reviews that I'd like you to respond to. One is the Sprint exclusivity. When is that changing? Some people say the camera is too simple, doesn't have enough features. Some people have said the loudspeaker, the fingerprints. This is getting down in the weeds,
Sure.
but since you're here, loudspeaker and the fingerprint scanner are not so great.
Yeah, so the distribution model we have is actually multi-channel. So we're selling an open market, SIM-free unlocked version through Essential.com, Best Buy, Amazon are announced. You have TELUS and Sprint as the exclusive carrier retail stores. And they're exclusive, you know, for the time being, but we've built a global phone, and we've been pretty transparent with everyone about the fact that we've built one model for all countries and all channels. So there's a balance when you're a startup between getting hero placement marketing, moving units, getting that virtuous circle going where you can move BOM costs down, drive margin, and keep reinvesting those profits and expanding distribution. So you're going to see that same model roll out in most countries. It'll be a multi-channel, all-carrier model through retails on our website, picking one carrier store to be exclusive.
So what about some of those other issues that reviewers are talking about? The camera, the loudspeaker, the fingerprint scanner?
Sure. You know, there's a lot of reviews out this morning, and I'd say I'm delighted with 80–90% of them. And there's always, of course, a couple of people that have, you know, different opinions. The software and the hardware are obviously, you know, the work of 50 people. We've just gotten to about 100 recently, so let's say 50 on average. We continue to refine it right up until ramp. So I think during the reviews we had software builds coming in,
right.
And so you're going to see tremendous improvements from us in the coming weeks, months as we ship, and of course those additional models to come. So
Will we get a waterproof one?
In due course, I think it's fair to say we recognize that that is one of the things that we need to do more on, as well as, of course, trying to enhance other elements of this and driving accessories for next year's models. So,
you know, talk to us about what is next, because Andy Rubin has said this is just a starting point.
Yeah.
So what's to come? That's
right. So we've announced a home product, which I believe your colleagues have seen and reviewed in person. And that's obviously a big swing at not only the home IoT space, but it's a start for us on a new operating system called Ambient OS. And Ambient OS is actually built for the Internet of Things world. It's built for a world where you have 50 or 100 Internet connected devices in your life, whereas today most people only have 3 or 4. And when Andy started Android, they only really had one, your desktop, in 2004. So every 10 years we get this change in computing platform, and we're very passionate about the fact that in the long term you have to have a new paradigm for AI computing to really make this world of IoT easier for you. How are you going to interact with 100 different devices that are data enabled? And what about this idea that, you know, one of the essential tenets of Essential is that it's going to solve this problem of us having to check our phones every 10 minutes. Yeah, how does it do that? Well, it's obviously a computing and a sensing challenge. And we've outlined that in a fair amount of detail, but ultimately we think the phone's important because, as I like to say, as long as humans are in charge, and I think we have at least 10 years where we're still in charge, screens are important. You sleep probably a couple feet away from this screen. All the other screens in your life, including the one we put on our home product, are also part of how you're going to sense your environment, and in your ecosystem, AmbuNS will learn about you. So this 360 camera, for example, has the ability to collect data, which you can, of course, learn about your patterns of behavior and preferences. It'll also be common, by the way, to our home product and other devices we bring out. So this magnetic accessory port will go on the home product. Anything else we bring out to build out a full ecosystem in the coming years.
All right, Niccolo de Masi, President and COO of Essential. We'll have to see how the orders come in, but good luck with the launch.
Space.
Thanks.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for stopping by. We do have some breaking news now. Of course, we were just talking about now former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon. He has just told Bloomberg that he will be going to war for President Trump. You know, we've been talking about whether he was going to be going to war against President Trump based on that tweet, especially coming from the senior editor at Breitbart saying #war. He has been speaking with Bloomberg, Steve Bannon himself. He says that he is still on the president's side. We will bring you more headlines as we have them from this conversation. Well, a spat between the board and the founders of computer company Infosys had shares tumbling today. We'll explain what's causing the rift. This is Bloomberg. The chief executive of India's Infosys has stepped down. CEO Vishal Sikka resigned after criticism from the company's founders. He will be replaced by Chief Operating Officer Pravin Rao. Shares of the company dropped just over 5% on the news. Infosys' founders have criticized the company for its acquisitions and executive pay. The company has been going through a difficult transition to digital services and data-based computing. Joining us now from London, Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde. So Caroline, talk to us about what's behind this. Of course, Sikka has been under pressure, but why now?
Yeah, under pressure from none other than the previous chairman, previous CEO, and one of the founders of Infosys. And it seems to have all come too much of a head at the moment, and actually ahead of analysts' expectations and investors. As you see the share price fall so much, it seems as though he's left rather swiftly, more swiftly than many anticipated. But it's basically ever since he took the helm back in 2014, so 3 years ago, he was the first ever non-founder CEO. Wasn't part of the club of the founders, some 7 that set up Infosys back in 1981, and the criticism has been very harsh for him. Not everything ran smooth, and notably, it's really in the last year that out-and-out war was really on with the former he's currently a billionaire, the co-founder of Infosys, Mr. Murthy. He in particular was taking aim at the CEO, Mr. Sikka, accusing them of numerous, governance lapses. He was questioning the acquisitions, the executive pay. Notably, Vishal Sikka therefore says, look, this was continuous noise. He gave a statement saying, I cannot carry on my job as CEO and continue to create value while also constantly defending against unrelenting, baseless, malicious and increasingly personal attacks. And interestingly, Emily, actually, the board has got his back. The board also said, look, this was demonstrably false allegations coming from Mr. Murthy. They said it harmed employee morale and it therefore led to the loss of a valued CEO. Meanwhile, Mr. Murthy himself seems to be unrepenting and is saying, look, I'm still worried about the deteriorating standard of corporate governance.
Now, Caroline, Infosys is a company that's come under fire for taking jobs from American workers, in response to President Trump's concerns about widespread abuse of the visa programs. Infosys had said they would hire 10,000 U.S. workers, but this controversy has not only pressure on the stock, but also Sikka himself. How has that played into this?
Yeah, not a great time to be without leadership as well when you're trying to navigate these choppy waters, particularly in the US, particularly when if you dig into the terminal, you're looking at Bloomberg and go into FA-Go, this is financial analysis, you see how important the US is to Infosys. It gets about 62% of its revenue from the country overall. It's #1 area of revenue growth. And so it's not great when you're seeing a crackdown, in particular on the H-1B visa, as you mentioned. Many, therefore, having to be hired inside invade the United States. 10,000 is what they promised back in April of this year. Well, that's going to hurt your margins because it's more costly because, of course, many of these workers were coming in on temporary visas and were cheaper. That was a criticism coming from the US. But we know that also there's headwinds of people not spending so much on software at the moment that Infosys provides, and automation. All of this means there's job cuts at Infosys.
So what happens next? How does the company attract a new CEO amidst all this drama from the founders and the board?
Really hard, I think, when you've still got such voices coming from the previous founders. And I think this is what needs to be backed off away from now. Interestingly, the vice chair of Infosys has said he hopes now that they can move on from this. Perhaps new blood coming in will help. And it's notable that actually, even in name, he's no longer CEO, but Mr. Seeker will stay on and basically play the role of CEO. He's going to be vice chair over at the board and going to be helping find a replacement for himself. The COO will be a steady pair of hands for the time being, but what they really need to do is stop this criticism coming from the previous founders and move on. Meanwhile, of course, this is a company that needs to drive revenue growth that much higher, and it interestingly did increase its revenue growth targets just last month.
Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde there for us in London. Thanks so much, Caroline, for that update. Now, coming up later this hour, the total solar eclipse is on its way. We'll take a look at how tech companies are planning to shine a light in its shadow. We'll also have more on that conversation between Steve Bannon and Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Mark Crumpton in New York. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of First Word News. Former White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon, whose last day on the job was today, tells Josh Green of Bloomberg News that he's going to war for President Trump and will take on the president's opponents in the media, Congress, and in business. Bannon's departure came following clashes with members of Mr. Trump's family and other White House officials in recent weeks. Meantime, former U.S. Ambassador to NATO Nicholas Burns told Bloomberg Friday the U.S. is experiencing a crisis of leadership.
We can be optimistic, but the president is a wild card, and he's shown that on issue after issue. And he needs to center this administration. I think I rely more on these cabinet secretaries who can produce, I think, better results for him.
Ambassador Burns added that the president, quote, doesn't even have a grasp of the central event of our history, the Civil War. A man stabbed 8 people in Finland Friday, killing 2 of them before he was shot and detained by police. Authorities were looking for more potential suspects in that attack. It happened in a city about 100 miles west of Helsinki. Officials say security has been stepped up across Finland. European flags flew at half-staff Friday outside European Commission headquarters in Brussels in tribute to the victims of Thursday's attack in Barcelona.
Here we are to express our sorrow, our shock, our disbelief, and above all to express our support to the city of Barcelona, its inhabitants, the Spanish people, and to the relatives of the victims of so many nationalities.
In the wake of the Catalonia attacks, the mayor of Nice, France, is planning a summit of mayors from cities across Europe next month. Christian Estrosi says $35 million has been spent in Nice thus far to protect potential targets, and cities need more money to cope with new threats. Estrosi says mayors are the first to be confronted by the violence. Syrian forces fighting alongside Hezbollah have captured extremist positions along the Syrian-Lebanese border. It comes ahead of an anticipated Lebanese offensive to clear ISIS fighters from Lebanon's side of the frontier. Meantime, the Russian military says its aircraft are supporting a Damascus government offensive. Sierra Leone officials say the chances of finding survivors in the debris of mudslides this week are diminishing by the day. More than 400 bodies have been recovered and about 600 people are missing. More than 100 victims are said to be children. Despite threats of further mudslides, the government's moving ahead with burials. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries.
Now back to our lead. Steve Bannon has made his first public remarks since his ouster today as chief strategist to President Donald Trump. Bannon telling Bloomberg that he, quote, will be going to war for the president. He says, if there's any confusion out there, let me clear it up. I'm leaving the White House and going to war for Trump against his opponents on Capitol Hill, in the media, and in corporate America. Bannon made those comments to Josh Green, our senior national correspondent for Bloomberg Businessweek, who wrote the book Devil's Bargain, a best-selling book. And Green joins us right now on the phone. So, Josh, you just got off the phone with Steve Bannon. What more did he have to say to you?
Well, I had basically wanted to know, what had gone down with his firing, whether he expected this, but mostly what he planned on doing next. There's been a lot of speculation, as you guys know, that Bannon has been on his way out for a long time. A very divisive figure within the administration who has been at open war with other Trump advisors, including Gary Cohn as recently as 2 days ago in his public comments. And Bannon told me that he had not had a falling out with Trump, that in fact he was going to continue this nationalist crusade on Trump's behalf from the outside, and he listed the three people that he was planning on targeting: Capitol Hill, opponents of Trump's in the media, and most interestingly to me, Trump's opponents in corporate America, who he thinks are pushing a crony capitalist agenda and inhibiting Trump's policies.
Interesting, of course, given the events of the last few days with several CEOs stepping down from his business councils, the councils then disbanding. Reading between the lines, Josh, what does this actually mean?
Well, I think it means that Bannon is going to take up a role similar to the one he had before he went into the White House, when he was the head of Breitbart News, but really more broadly than that, an influential political figure who helped drive the takeover of the Republican Party over the last 2 or 3 years that culminated with the rise of Donald Trump and his presidential victory. I think that Bannon believes that his populist nationalist crusade is ongoing, that it has been set back by opponents, even in Trump's own White House, the people that Bannon derisively refers to as the Davos class and globalists, and that he is going to be uninhibited on the outside in a way that he was not able to be working inside the West Wing.
Now, there's speculation that he may return to Breitbart, that Breitbart will be taking on his agenda. Did he say whether indeed he plans to return there formally?
He did not say on the record he is going to return there formally. However, in my reporting this morning, I talked to 3 people very close to Bannon, all of whom said they expect him to return to Breitbart News. So if I were betting, I would guess that that would be his first stop once he leaves the White House.
So, he says he's still on the president's side. Did he give you any more indication of why he left and why now? Of course, people want to draw a line between what's happened in Charlottesville and the president remarks and the idea that Bannon may be taking the fall for the criticism of those remarks.
I don't think that is what led to this firing. Bannon certainly didn't seem to think so. He had just passed yesterday the 1-year anniversary of his work for Trump. He took over Trump's floundering presidential campaign on August 17th, 2016, was the architect of Trump's victory and has helped to guide him in the White House with only fitfully positive results. Bannon indicated that he had planned on leaving at some point all along. There are disputes among the sources I've talked to about whether Bannon was going to leave now or whether he was pushed. He says that this was his decision, along with in consultation with Chief of Staff John Kelly and President Trump, and that there is no bad blood, no bad feeling, no animosity with the president, as is reflected in the quote that he gave to Bloomberg News.
Now, it's been said that Bannon's ideologies don't fit into a neat little box, that, yes, much of it aligns with the alt-right, but some of them, some of the things that he thinks and the ideas that he pushes are much more liberal ideas. Our colleague, Kevin Cirilli, tweeted, that he had heard from a source, now there are all Democrats in the White House, whether it's Jared or Ivanka or Gary Cohn. What does that mean for Bannon now on the outside?
Well, I think that it means that he is not going to feel as though he is inhibited in quite the same way he was as a West Wing staffer. In our interview, Bannon was a good soldier and made a good show of refraining from attacking any individual White House officials who he may have been butting heads with. But it's no secret that Bannon has been in more or less open warfare with people like Gary Cohn and Stephen Mnuchin, as well as Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, and other people in the administration, especially in the foreign policy realm, which had been such a source of contention within the West Wing over the past few months.
So if you're in any of these three groups that he's called out, folks on Capitol Hill, in the media, in corporate America, should you be bracing yourself right now, or is this going to be more bark than bite?
Well, I don't think it's going to be more bark than bite, because Bannon clearly speaks for a significant portion of the Republican base, and that includes Trump's most ardent supporters. I think the fear among some Republicans was that Bannon would leave and would go outside and would immediately begin attacking President Trump, which would essentially set off a civil war within the Republican Party. That is not what Bannon is planning on doing. I think what he's going to do instead from the outside is to put public pressure on the elements of Trump's administration, especially the Wall Street folks, who Bannon believes are inhibiting Trump from carrying out the populist nationalist agenda that he ran on. And now in Bannon's view, that ought to include things like increasing marginal tax rates on the rich and pursuing more of a non-interventionist foreign policy than Trump's advisors, his national security advisor, H.R. McMaster, with whom Bannon has been feuding, are inclined to want to pursue. So I think what's going to happen is that the struggles that have been going on inside the White House and leaking out in bits and pieces to reporters are now going to be waged more openly now that Steve Bannon doesn't have to worry about losing his job in the White House.
All right, and important to note, Steve Bannon spoke to you first. Josh Green, our senior national correspondent for Bloomberg Business Week, just out with a new best-selling book, Devil's Bargain, about Steve Bannon's influence on President Trump and the presidency. Josh, thanks so much for joining us. Coming up, what regulatory barriers stand in the way of ride-sharing companies like Uber and the future of transportation? We'll discuss. This is Bloomberg. One of the most bearish stock strategists on Wall Street thinks Bitcoin still has lots of room to run, despite hitting all-time highs. Former JP Morgan Chase chief U.S. equity strategist Thomas Lee says the cryptocurrency could hit $6,000 by the middle of next year. Lee says user accounts are likely to rise 50%. He expects Bitcoin to reach about $25,000 by 2022. Well, Uber, the ride-sharing giant and world's most valuable startup, has been in the news a lot this week. Among its more notorious headlines, the battle with the government in the Philippines. Uber, along with other ride-sharing companies like Grab, was ordered to halt operations in an effort to combat congestion there, an order it defied, pending an appeal. Joining me now from New York to discuss this, as well as take a look at the future of transportation. Actually, it looks like he is in D.C. Gabe Klein, the co-founder of CityFi and the senior vice president at Fontanellis Partners. Gabe, thanks for joining us back here on the show. So look, it's not the first time Uber has defied the government. How big a problem do you think this kind of thing will be for Uber globally and here in the United States?
Well, thanks, Emily, for having me on. I mean, I think Uber is used to this now. They do this over and over, where they sort of push things to the limit, right, and then beg for forgiveness. And that's what's happened in the Philippines. They were suspended for a month, and that's a significant problem for them on the revenue front, but also, obviously, it gives Grab, their competitor there, a big opportunity to grab market share, no pun intended. And so that's a loss. But, you know, I think that this is a problem they're going to continue to face around the world, particularly in places like Europe and Asia, because, you know, their governments might be a little more authoritarian or more sort of left-leaning. And I think that they're in a situation where the technology is moving so fast, the business models are evolving, and the governments feel like they can't keep up. And so they're trying to slow things down, and Uber obviously doesn't like that.
Now, you're a Lyft investor, and it's very easy to get caught up in this idea of ride sharing as the future. But in places like China, we're seeing a resurgence in bikes and bike sharing. I mean, how do you think the chips actually fall when it gets to like a decade, 2 decades from now?
I'm very excited about the renaissance of the bike. I was the commissioner of the DC and Chicago Departments of Transportation at one time. And we implemented one of the first large-scale bike-sharing services in the U.S., here in Washington, D.C., then in Chicago. And people love it. And sometimes I think we overcomplicate people's trips. The use case for a 1 to 2 to 3 mile trip, which is about 70% of trips in cities, is perfect for biking. And so when you look at whether it's OFO or Mobike, Spin, they're US-based companies, Chinese-based companies coming into the US. And I know that the existing docked bike share operators and sometimes cities are worried about it. But big picture, I think the single occupancy vehicle, the car, is really the enemy here. I shouldn't say enemy, it's the market opportunity. And so as that goes down, there's going to be huge opportunities for bikes, for people to walk, for driverless shuttles, and various other technologies and modes to fill the gap.
And talk about other competitors, the Hyperloop. There are more futuristic plans at work. In July, Elon Musk tweeted, just received verbal government approval for the Boring Company to build an underground New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, D.C. Hyperloop, New York to D.C. in 29 minutes. What really goes into getting approval for something like this, and how realistic is it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I give Elon a lot of credit for a lot of different things, and definitely for starting a dialogue about this and getting a tremendous amount of press and marketing out of it very quickly. But the reality is, no offense to Elon, but a verbal approval from the government doesn't really mean anything. Because, first of all, you have to deal with the state and local jurisdictions, particularly where something like the Hyperloop would begin and would terminate. But then above and beyond that, I mean, there's all of the funding that has to be figured out, the right-of-way issues, which means the land that you have to utilize or procure and utilize to build something like this. So you're talking about a process that's probably minimum 5 years. So in the grand scheme of things, verbal approval doesn't mean much, but he got a lot of earned media out of it.
And do you think the Hyperloop can happen? 30 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, people thought that the interstate railroads or the interstate highway system were crazy ideas at one time, and they definitely happened. And when you think about the Hyperloop, it's basically a vacuum, and it makes a lot of sense. But like anything else, it takes time to get these things in the ground, so to speak.
All right, Gabe Klein, Senior Vice President at Fontanellis Partners. Thanks so much for joining us. Coming up, Hollywood studios and Apple are said to mull a potential rental plan. We'll dig into what each side has to gain or lose. This is Bloomberg. Hollywood studios are considering a plan that could cut into business at movie theaters. According to people familiar with the matter, the filmmakers may go ahead with a proposal to offer digital rentals of movies on video-on-demand platforms like Apple and Comcast, just weeks after they appear on the big screen. Joining us now from LA, our Bloomberg News editor, Creighton Harrison. So, Creighton, what do we know?
Well, I think you pretty much just said it. I mean, the movie studios are kind of in these conversations with potential distributors of digital downloads like Apple, Comcast, cable companies that sell video on demand, to offer films just even weeks after they debut in theaters. This has been going on for a while. That the studios have also been talking to the theaters because they'd like to kind of have their consent and permission to do this. It would all go much more smoothly for them. But so far they haven't been able to reach this agreement, and they're starting to feel like they might have to go it alone.
So can movie theaters fight back?
Yeah, there's a lot that movie theaters can do to fight back, and the main thing is, they're still the biggest generator of revenue for films, and they can just boycott a movie. If the studios say, well, the next Avengers, well, not the Avengers because that's Disney, but for example, we're gonna release direct to homes within a few weeks after it's in theaters. The theaters could say, no thanks, we're not gonna do that. That's the biggest thing they could do, and that's the thing that makes this a very touchy situation.
So quickly, then, how do you expect this to play out?
Well, it's still a work in progress. If things come to a head, then what you could see is the studios, as early as beginning of next year, try to experiment with putting out a movie, just a couple of weeks after it's in theaters. That could happen in the U.S. or in a foreign market if they want to dabble, and they'll just test it out and see how it goes. You could see price points anywhere from $30, $40, $50 for that type of service. Which, if you compare that to the cost of getting a babysitter and going out a couple of people to the movies, might come out okay. Or you could see that the studios back off and say, what, we need to get the theaters on board. Let's take our time with this and take a little longer to get it right.
All right. Our Bloomberg News editor, Creighton Harrison, there in L.A. Thanks so much. Well, on Monday, people across the U.S. will be treated to a rare event, a total solar eclipse that will sweep across the nation, casting millions into darkness, but only temporarily. We took a look at how the tech industry is faring in the shadow of the moon.
Thousands of people will be lining up to watch the first total solar eclipse in nearly a century, visible only in America. And tech companies from Google to Airbnb are offering ways to watch the spectacle like never before.
Now, where I am, San Francisco, isn't the ideal place to see the total effect of the eclipse.
To truly see that, you need to be along the path of totality, a 70-mile wide, 3,000-mile long swath that will cut across the country. But the best view? That's reserved for 4 NASA pilots. Their mission? To chase the darkness in 2 retrofitted WB-57 jet planes. The jets hope to capture the clearest images of the corona, the sun's outer atmosphere, as well as the first ever thermal images of Mercury.
But for those of us not lucky enough to go supersonic, there are other ways to watch. Google is partnering with the education company Mystery Science to hand out 14,000 pairs of these glasses to make it safe for kids and teachers to watch.
Because, as NASA will remind you, it's dangerous to try and look at the eclipse through homemade lenses. And for those who are not in the path of the eclipse, they can get a taste of what they're missing through Google Earth VR. But there's also a different kind of dark side to this event. Amazon is waging a war on sellers, trying to pass off fake glasses that could damage the eyes of unsuspecting shoppers. The company has gone as far as issuing an email warning and refunds to customers who bought the knockoffs.
Another business feeling the eclipse bump? Airbnb.
Over 24,000 homes along the path of totality have registered on the home-sharing site with 50,000 incoming guests. That's nearly 4 times the number who stayed in the same area last year. And Hertz is also cashing in, bringing in extra cars to handle demand. This after the company faced an online backlash after canceling overbooked reservations. Even the company Nest is hoping customers use their learning thermostats to help save energy during the eclipse by pre-cooling eligible homes.
All in all, the eclipse could disrupt productivity for nearly 83% of the country, totaling close to $700 million.
It will also test the nation's power grid. A Bloomberg report estimates the eclipse could knock down 9,000 megawatts of solar power. That's the equivalent of 9 nuclear reactors, enough energy to power 7 million homes.
So as solar energy drops, more power plants across the country will have to pick up the slack during this once-in-a-lifetime event. You can catch the eclipse on Monday, 10 o'clock Pacific time on the West Coast. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Thanks so much for watching. A reminder, we are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. This is Bloomberg.